The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the dusty trading post in Nevada, Missouri, and Nathan Ashford knew immediately that something was wrong when the driver called for help, instead of hollering about fresh horses. It was late August in 1878, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier town that sat at the crossroads between civilization and the untamed territories beyond. Nathan had been loading supplies onto his wagon when he heard the commotion, and he dropped the sack of grain he'd been carrying to stride toward the coach, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The driver, an old-timer named Jeremiah, was already climbing down from his perch, his weathered face creased with concern. "Got a sick woman in here," he called out to anyone within earshot. "Been burning up with fever since we left Springfield. Needs a doctor, but I don't think she can wait much longer." Nathan reached the coach door and pulled it open, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, slumped against the worn leather seat, was a young woman who looked to be in her early 20s. Her dark hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat, and even in her unconscious state, he could see her trembling. Her traveling dress was rumpled and stained from the long journey, and her face held an unhealthy flush that spoke of dangerous fever. "Miss," Nathan said, reaching in to gently touch her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. A soft moan escaped her cracked lips, and Nathan felt his chest tighten with concern. He'd seen fever take people before, especially out here where medical care was scarce, and the journey from civilized places could take its toll on even the strongest constitutions. "Doc Henderson left town 3 days ago," Jeremiah said, confirming Nathan's fears. "Went up to Kansas City for some medical conference. Won't be back for another week at least." Nathan didn't hesitate. He reached into the coach and carefully lifted the woman into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, which only worried him more. How long had she been sick? Had she been eating? "I'll take her to my place," he said firmly. "My ma was a nurse before she passed, taught me plenty about caring for the ill." "You sure about that, Nathan?" Jeremiah asked, though there was relief in his voice. "Don't want to impose on you. What's her name?" Where was she headed? Jeremiah retrieved a small leather satchel from inside the coach. "Ticket says Beatrice Zimmerman. Was supposed to meet her uncle here in Nevada, fellow named Robert Zimmerman. But I asked around when we stopped in Harrisonville, and nobody's heard of any Zimmerman in these parts." Nathan's jaw tightened. It wouldn't be the first time someone had sent for a relative who didn't exist, or who'd moved on without sending word. The woman in his arms stirred slightly, her head rolling against his shoulder, and he felt the heat radiating from her skin even through the fabric of her dress. "We'll sort that out later. Right now, she needs help." His ranch was only 2 miles outside of town, a modest spread with a small house, a barn, and enough land for his cattle and horses. Nathan had built most of it himself over the past 5 years, ever since he'd returned from working the cattle drives up north, with enough money saved to start his own operation. At 26, he thought he had his life figured out, content with the solitude and the honest work of running his ranch. But as he carried Beatrice Zimmerman toward his wagon, her slight weight in his arms and her labored breathing against his chest, he felt something shift inside him, a protective instinct he hadn't expected. The ride back to the ranch seemed to take forever. Nathan had fashioned a makeshift bed in the back of the wagon using the grain sacks and his own coat, trying to make Beatrice as comfortable as possible. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling words he couldn't make out, other times lying frighteningly still. He pushed the horses harder than he normally would have, the wagon bouncing over the rutted road. When they finally reached the house, Nathan carried her inside and laid her on his own bed, the only one in the small two-room structure. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, making the room uncomfortably warm, so he quickly drew the curtains to create some shade. Then he went to work with the efficiency his mother had drilled into him years ago. First, he needed to get her temperature down. He fetched water from the well, cool and fresh, and tore up some clean cloth for compresses. Returning to the bedroom, he hesitated for just a moment, knowing he'd need to remove at least some of her traveling clothes to treat her properly. But there was no one else, and propriety seemed far less important than saving her life. Working as respectfully as he could, Nathan removed her dust-covered traveling jacket and unlaced her boots. Her feet were blistered and swollen, suggesting she'd done considerable walking at some point before boarding the stage. He left her dress on but loosened the collar and sleeves, then began applying the cool compresses to her forehead, neck, and wrists. For the first hour, there was no change. Beatrice remained locked in her fevered state, her breathing shallow and rapid. Nathan sat beside the bed, regularly changing the compresses and trying to get small sips of water past her lips. He found himself studying her face, noticing details he hadn't registered in his initial rush to help her. She had delicate features, with high cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw even in illness. Her hands, which he held while trying to cool her wrists, were small but showed signs of hard work, not the soft hands of a pampered city woman. As evening approached, Nathan prepared a simple broth, hoping he might be able to get some nourishment into her. He'd seen his mother do this countless times during the cholera outbreak that had swept through their previous town when he was younger. Keep them hydrated, keep the fever down, and give the body time to fight, she'd always said. He was spooning tiny amounts of broth into Beatrice's mouth when her eyes finally opened. They were a striking shade of blue-green, like the river in summer, but clouded with confusion and fever. She stared at him without recognition, her lips moving soundlessly. "Easy now," Nathan said softly, setting the bowl aside. "You're safe. You got sick on the stagecoach and I brought you to my ranch to recover. My name is Nathan Ashford." "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper, raw and strained. "Nevada, Missouri. You arrived here this afternoon. Do you remember boarding the stage?" Her brow furrowed, and tears suddenly welled in her eyes. "Uncle Robert, I need to find Uncle Robert." Nathan's heart sank, but he kept his voice gentle. "We'll find him, I promise. But right now, you need to rest and get better. Can you tell me your name?" "Beatrice," she managed, then her eyes closed again, exhaustion claiming her. Through the night, Nathan dozed in the chair beside the bed, waking every hour to check on his patient. Beatrice's fever seemed to peak around midnight, her temperature so high that Nathan briefly considered riding back to town to see if anyone knew of another doctor in the area. But moving her seemed more dangerous than staying put, so he redoubled his efforts with the cool compresses and managed to get more water into her. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, the fever finally broke. Nathan dozed with his head resting on his arms on the edge of the bed, and he woke to find Beatrice's hand had moved to rest against his. Her skin was cooler, and when he checked her forehead, the dangerous heat had subsided to a more manageable warmth. Relief flooded through him so intensely that he had to stand and walk to the window, taking deep breaths of the cool night air. When dawn came, Nathan was exhausted but cautiously optimistic. He prepared more broth and soft bread soaked in milk, food that would be easy on a recovering stomach. Beatrice woke properly around mid-morning, and though she was weak, her eyes were clearer and focused. "How long have I been here?" she asked, her voice still rough but stronger than before. "Just since yesterday afternoon," Nathan replied, helping her sit up slightly against the pillows he'd arranged. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," she admitted, but there was a hint of humor in her tone that encouraged him. "I'm sorry. You must be Nathan. I remember you telling me your name, I think. Everything is rather foggy." "That's to be expected. You had a dangerous fever. Can you eat something?" She nodded, and Nathan carefully fed her small spoonfuls of the bread and broth. She managed about half the bowl before exhaustion claimed her again, but it was progress. As she drifted back to sleep, Nathan finally allowed himself to step outside, breathing in the fresh morning air and feeling the tension drain from his shoulders. Over the next 3 days, Nathan fell into a routine of caring for Beatrice. He'd wake early to tend to his animals and do the most essential chores, then return to the house to prepare food and check on his patient. Each day, she grew a little stronger, able to stay awake for longer periods and eat more substantial meals. They began to talk, tentative conversations at first, but gradually becoming more comfortable. Beatrice told him about her journey from Boston, how her parents had died within months of each other the previous winter, leaving her orphaned and nearly destitute. Her father's business partner had cheated the family, taking everything that should have been her inheritance. Uncle Robert, her father's younger brother, had been her last hope. He'd written to her father years ago, mentioning that he'd settled in Nevada, Missouri, and had done well for himself. Beatrice had scraped together enough money for the stagecoach ticket, selling everything she owned except for the contents of one small trunk. "I didn't realize how far it would be," she said on the 3rd day, sitting up in bed with a shawl draped around her shoulders. Nathan had brought her trunk from town, and she wore a fresh nightgown now, her hair brushed and braided. The journey took weeks, and the last stage was so crowded and uncomfortable. "I think I must have caught something from one of the other passengers. I remember feeling poorly when we left Springfield, but I thought it was just exhaustion." Nathan sat in the chair that had become his usual spot, mending a bridle while they talked. "I sent word to the sheriff to ask around about your uncle." "I'm sorry, Beatrice, but no one in these parts knows of any Robert Zimmerman." Her face fell, though she tried to hide it. "Perhaps he moved on, or maybe I misremembered the town name. Everything from those letters seems so long ago now." "We'll figure it out," Nathan assured her. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. Once you're fully recovered, we can send telegrams to other towns, search the county records. You've been so kind already. I can't impose on you any longer than necessary. It's not an imposition." Nathan found he meant it more than he'd expected. Having Beatrice in his home had disrupted his routine, certainly, but he discovered he didn't mind the company. She was intelligent and well-spoken, with a quiet strength that impressed him. Despite everything she'd been through, she hadn't given in to despair. By the end of the first week, Beatrice was well enough to leave the bed for short periods. Nathan helped her to a chair by the window where she could look out at the ranch. He saw her studying everything with keen interest. The vegetable garden that desperately needed weeding, the chickens pecking in the yard, the horses in the corral. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "So different from Boston. Everything there was crowded and noisy. Here you can actually hear the wind and the birds." "Gets lonely sometimes," Nathan admitted, "but I like the peace of it. Built this place myself, every board and nail. You should be proud. It's a fine home." Something in the way she said it, the wistfulness in her voice, made Nathan's heart ache. She'd lost everything, her home, her family, her security. And now even the uncle she'd traveled so far to find seemed to be a ghost, perhaps never having existed in Nevada at all. That evening, as Nathan prepared supper, Beatrice insisted on helping despite his protests. She was still weak, but she was determined to be useful. They worked together in the small kitchen, and Nathan found himself acutely aware of her presence, the way she moved around the space, the soft humming sound she made while chopping vegetables. "My mother taught me to cook," she said, adding the vegetables to the pot. "She said a woman should be able to feed her family no matter the circumstances. I never imagined those circumstances would include a ranch in Missouri, but I'm grateful for the skill now. Your ma sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. I miss her terribly. And my father." Beatrice's voice caught, and she turned away quickly, but not before Nathan saw the tears in her eyes. He crossed the small kitchen and gently touched her shoulder. "I lost my ma 5 years ago. My pa went before that when I was just a boy. The grief doesn't go away, but it does get easier to carry." She turned to face him, and for a moment they stood close in the small space, her eyes searching his face. "Thank you, Nathan, for everything, for saving my life, for your kindness. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No need for repayment. Just get well, that's all I ask." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Then Beatrice stepped back, wiping at her eyes, and they returned to preparing the meal as if nothing had shifted, though both of them knew something had. The second week brought more progress. Beatrice grew stronger each day, able to take short walks around the property with Nathan's arm to steady her. He showed her the ranch, explaining his plans for expanding the herd, the new pasture he wanted to fence in before winter. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was really paying attention. "You could run more cattle if you had help," she observed as they stood by the corral watching his horses. "This is too much for one person to manage alone." "I hire extra hands for the roundup and branding," Nathan said. "But you're right, it would be easier with a partner." He paused, then added carefully, "I always figured I'd find a wife eventually, share the work and the rewards." Beatrice glanced at him, something uncertain in her expression. "I imagine women don't come through Nevada too often. Not many, no, and most who do are already spoken for." He didn't say what he was thinking, that in the past week, he'd thought more about marriage than he had in the previous 5 years, and that all those thoughts seemed to center on the woman standing beside him. They'd fallen into an easy companionship, but Nathan was increasingly aware of the impropriety of their situation. Beatrice was living in his home, unchaperoned, and while her illness had made it necessary, she was recovering now. People in town would talk if they weren't already. He needed to think about her reputation, even as he selfishly wanted her to stay. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Nathan broached the subject that had been weighing on his mind. "I was thinking I should take you into town tomorrow. We can speak to Reverend Matthews and his wife. They might have room for you to board with them while we search for your uncle." Beatrice was quiet for a long moment. "Is that what you want, for me to leave?" "No," Nathan said honestly. "But I'm thinking of your reputation. People will talk, you being out here alone with me." "People talked in Boston too," Beatrice said with a trace of bitterness. "They talked about how my father's partner ruined us, about how I had to sell my mother's jewelry piece by piece just to eat. They talked, but not one of them offered real help." She turned to look at him directly. "You've shown me more genuine kindness than anyone in that city ever did. I don't care what people say. You might care eventually, if it affects your prospects, your future." "My prospects?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Nathan, I'm a penniless orphan who traveled halfway across the country looking for an uncle who doesn't seem to exist. What prospects do I have?" He wanted to tell her that she had more prospects than she realized, that she was intelligent and capable and beautiful, that any man would be lucky to have her. But the words stuck in his throat, too revealing, too soon. Instead, he said, you could work in town. The general store might need help or the boarding house. You could build a new life here. Is that what you want? For me to build a life in town? Nathan met her eyes, seeing the challenge there, the vulnerability beneath it. I want you to have choices, Beatrice. You've had too many things taken from you. I won't be another person who takes your choices away. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then I choose to stay here, at least for now. I can help around the ranch, earn my keep properly. I'm not an invalid anymore, Nathan. Let me be useful. Relief and something warmer flooded through Nathan. All right, but we do this properly. I'll speak to Reverend Matthews, let him know the situation, and you take the bedroom, I'll sleep in the barn. That's not necessary. It is to me. We'll do this right, Beatrice. She smiled then, a real smile that lit up her face and made Nathan's heart skip. All right, Cowboy, we'll do it your way. The nickname stuck, and over the following weeks, as summer began to fade toward autumn, it became a term of endearment between them. Beatrice proved to be as capable as she'd claimed. Once her strength fully returned, she took over the vegetable garden, the cooking, and the endless task of keeping the house clean against the constant invasion of dust. She learned to milk the cow, collect eggs from the chickens, and even helped Nathan with some of the lighter ranch work. True to his word, Nathan had moved his things to the barn, fixing up a small space in the loft that was comfortable enough. He'd also made a point of riding into town to speak with Reverend Matthews and his wife, Clara, explaining the situation honestly. The Reverend had been understanding, and Clara had insisted on visiting the ranch to meet Beatrice properly. The two women had taken to each other immediately, and Clara's approval went a long way toward quieting any potential gossip in town. She pronounced Beatrice a perfectly respectable young woman who'd had a run of bad luck, and made sure to mention it to everyone she encountered at the general store and the church social. Nathan and Clara also made inquiries about Robert Zimmerman, sending telegrams to nearby towns and checking old records at the county office. They found one lead. A Robert Zimmerman had indeed lived in Nevada, Missouri, but he died 3 years earlier in a farming accident. The letter Beatrice's father had received must have been written before that, and in the chaos of her parents' deaths and the loss of their home, no one had known to inform Beatrice of her uncle's passing. When Nathan told her the news, Beatrice took it with the quiet strength he'd come to admire. At least I know now, she said. I'm not waiting for something that will never come. I can move forward. What do you want to do? Nathan asked. They were standing in the garden where Beatrice had been harvesting the last of the summer squash. The September air held the first hints of the cooling weather to come. I don't know, she admitted. I could look for work in town like you suggested, maybe save enough to travel somewhere bigger, find better opportunities. The thought of her leaving made Nathan's chest tighten. Over the past month, he'd grown accustomed to her presence, more than accustomed. He looked forward to seeing her in the mornings, to their conversations over meals, to the way she laughed at his stories about the mishaps of ranch life. The house felt like a home now in a way it never had when he lived there alone. Or, he prompted, sensing there was more she wanted to say. Beatrice set down the basket of squash and brushed the dirt from her hands. Or I could stay here, keep helping you with the ranch. I know I'm not strong enough for the heavy work, but I can handle the garden, the chickens, the cooking. Between the two of us, we've managed well this past month. We have, Nathan agreed carefully. But Beatrice, that's not a permanent solution. Eventually, you'd want your own life, your own home. What if this could be my home? She looked up at him, her blue-green eyes direct and honest. Nathan, I know this is terribly forward of me, but we've been dancing around something for weeks now. I feel it, and I think you do too. I'm not asking you to make any promises, but I don't want to leave. Not unless you want me to." Nathan's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. "I don't want you to leave. I haven't wanted that since the day I carried you off that stagecoach. But I didn't want to take advantage, didn't want you to feel obligated because I helped you." "I don't feel obligated. I feel grateful, yes, but that's not why I want to stay." She stepped closer to him. "You're a good man, Nathan Ashford. You're kind and hardworking and honest. This past month, even while I was recovering, I've been happier here than I was in all my years in Boston. You make me feel safe and valued. I haven't felt that way in a very long time. Beatrice." Her name came out rough, full of emotion he'd been holding back. "I care about you. More than I should, probably, given how quickly it's happened. But I'm just a rancher with a modest spread and a simple life. You deserve more than this. I deserve to choose my own path, and I choose this. I choose you if you'll have me." Nathan closed the distance between them and cupped her face gently in his hands, his calloused thumbs brushing across her cheeks. "Are you sure? Because once I start courting you properly, I'm not going to want to let you go. I want to marry you, build a life with you here on this ranch. I want everything. Then court me properly, Cowboy, and we'll see where it leads." He kissed her then, soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence as she responded, her arms winding around his neck. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Nathan felt like his whole world had shifted on its axis. Over the next weeks, Nathan did court Beatrice properly. He took her to the church social in town, where she charmed everyone with her easy manner and genuine interest in their lives. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow and sat with her on the porch in the evenings, telling her stories about his childhood and his dreams for the future. She shared her own stories, the happy memories of her parents and her life before everything had fallen apart. They worked side by side during the day, and Nathan found himself constantly amazed by Beatrice's adaptability. She'd grown up in a city in comfort, but she took to ranch life as if she'd been born to it. She learned to read the weather, to understand the rhythms of the animals, to find satisfaction in the simple accomplishments of a day well worked. In October, Nathan took Beatrice to the county fair in a neighboring town. They walked through the exhibitions hand in hand, examined the prize cattle and horses, and ate candy apples while watching the riding competitions. As the sun set and they prepared for the journey home, Nathan led her to a quiet spot overlooking the fairgrounds. "Beatrice Zimmerman," he said, taking both her hands in his. "I know we haven't known each other long, just a few months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You walked into my world sick and vulnerable, and somehow you've become the strongest, most important part of my life. I love you. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes. Yes, Nathan, I'll marry you. I love you too so much." He kissed her there as the last light faded from the sky, and the sounds of the fair created a joyful backdrop to their private moment. Nathan had a ring in his pocket, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. He slipped it onto Beatrice's finger, and it fit as if it had been made for her. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Nevada, Missouri, with Reverend Matthews officiating and what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Clara Matthews had helped Beatrice make a dress from fabric Nathan had bought in town, a soft blue that matched her eyes. Beatrice had never looked more beautiful, and as Nathan stood at the altar watching her walk toward him, he sent a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had brought her into his life. The wedding breakfast was held at the town hall, with neighbors contributing food and well wishes. Nathan barely tasted any of it, too focused on his new wife, the way she laughed and talked with everyone, the way she kept glancing at him as if to make sure he was real. when they finally left for the ranch, riding together in the wagon with tin cans tied to the back by some of the younger townspeople, Nathan felt a completeness he'd never experienced before. That night, back at the ranch that was now truly their home, Nathan carried Beatrice over the threshold of the house. He'd spent the previous evening cleaning and preparing everything, moving his things back into the bedroom they would now share. There were wildflowers in a jar on the table and fresh sheets on the bed. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ashford," he said, setting her down gently. "Home," Beatrice repeated, looking around with wonder in her eyes. "It really is, isn't it? This is my home now, and you're my family." "For the rest of our lives," Nathan promised. He kissed her softly, then more deeply, and they came together with a tenderness and passion that felt like the natural culmination of everything that had been building between them since that first day. Their first winter together was hard but happy. The weather turned cold early, with snow falling in November and not letting up until March. Nathan taught Beatrice to ice skate on the frozen pond at the edge of his property, and they spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other from the few books they owned or simply talking about their hopes and plans. Beatrice proved invaluable during the difficult months. When Nathan caught a bad cold in January, she nursed him with the same careful attention he'd shown her when she first arrived. When supplies ran low during a particularly brutal week of storms, she managed to stretch what they had with creative cooking and careful rationing. They were partners in every sense, working together to keep the ranch running and building something strong and lasting. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Beatrice discovered she was pregnant in April, and Nathan's excitement was tempered by worry. The nearest doctor was still in Kansas City, hours away by train, and Doc Henderson, who had returned to Nevada, was getting old and admitted he had limited experience with childbirth complications. "We'll be fine," Beatrice assured him, though Nathan could see the nervousness in her eyes. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, and Clara has promised to be here when the time comes. She's helped deliver dozens of babies." Nathan threw himself into preparing, fixing up one corner of the bedroom as a nursery and building a cradle from smooth pine wood. He worked on it in the evenings, sanding it until there wasn't a single rough edge that could harm delicate baby skin. Beatrice sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving with practiced efficiency even as her belly grew round. They talked about names in those long summer evenings, Nathan's hand resting on Beatrice's stomach, feeling the baby kick and move. They agreed that if it was a boy, they'd name him Thomas, after Nathan's father. For a girl, they chose Rose, for the wildflowers that grew on the property and that Nathan had given Beatrice during their courtship. Labor came in late October, almost exactly a year after Nathan had proposed. It was a long, difficult process that left Nathan feeling helpless and terrified. Clara was there, calm and competent, while Nathan paced outside the bedroom, listening to Beatrice's cries and fighting the urge to break down the door and demand to be let in. After what felt like a lifetime but was really about 12 hours, he heard a new sound, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Clara opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son, Nathan, a healthy baby boy." Nathan rushed into the room to find Beatrice propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she'd made. "Nathan, come meet your son." He approached almost reverently and looked down at the small, red face of his child. Thomas had a shock of dark hair like his mother and what appeared to be his father's nose. His tiny hand wrapped around Nathan's finger with surprising strength, and Nathan felt his eyes burn with tears. "He's perfect," Nathan managed. "You're both perfect. Thank you, Beatrice." Thank you for this gift. Beatrice smiled up at him, tired but happy. We made him together, you and I, our little miracle. Clara stayed for a few days to help, but Beatrice recovered quickly, her natural strength reasserting itself. Nathan discovered that parenthood suited him. He loved the early morning feedings when Thomas would fuss and Nathan would walk him around the house, showing him the ranch through the windows and telling him stories about the horses and cattle in a soft voice. Life settled into a new rhythm. Nathan hired a young man from town named Billy to help with the heavier ranch work, allowing him more time to spend with his family. Beatrice managed the household and cared for Thomas with the same competence she brought to everything else. But Nathan made sure she had time to rest and that she wasn't overwhelmed. Thomas was 6 months old when Nathan and Beatrice were able to take their first trip into town as a family. The townspeople cooed over the baby, and Nathan felt a fierce pride watching Beatrice interact with their neighbors. She'd become a part of this community in a way he never could have imagined when he first lifted her fevered body from that stagecoach. That evening, sitting on their porch with Thomas sleeping in Beatrice's arms and the sunset painting the sky in brilliant colors, Nathan reflected on how much his life had changed. "Do you ever miss Boston?" he asked. "The city life, all that you left behind?" Beatrice looked at him with surprise. "Not for a single moment. Everything I lost there I've found again here, but better. I have a home that's truly mine, work that matters, and most importantly, I have you and Thomas. This is where I was meant to be, Nathan. I'm certain of it. Even though you arrived sick and half dead. Even though your uncle didn't exist and all your plans fell apart. Especially because of that," she said firmly. "If things had gone according to plan, I would have found my uncle and lived as a dependent in his household, always grateful but never truly having a life of my own. Instead, I found you. You gave me back my life when you nursed me through that fever, and then you gave me a new life, one I chose for myself. How could I regret any of it?" Nathan leaned over to kiss her forehead, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "I'm the one who got the better end of this deal. You brought light and love into a life I didn't even realize was lonely." The years passed in a blur of growth and change. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around the ranch. 2 years after his birth, Beatrice had a daughter they named Rose as planned. She had Nathan's dark eyes and her mother's determination, apparent from the moment she entered the world screaming with indignation at the cold air. The ranch prospered as Nathan expanded the herd and bought adjacent land from a neighbor who was retiring. Billy became a permanent fixture, proving himself invaluable and eventually bringing his own wife to live in a small house Nathan built at the far end of the property. The vegetable garden that Beatrice had nursed back to health, that first autumn grew larger each year, producing enough that they could sell the surplus in town. Nathan and Beatrice faced challenges together. A drought in their 4th year that tested everyone's endurance, a winter illness that swept through the area and left Thomas weak for weeks, the everyday struggles of ranch life and raising children. But they faced everything as partners, drawing strength from each other and from the love that had only deepened with time. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised Beatrice by taking her back to the county fair where he'd proposed. Billy and his wife watched the children, giving them a rare day alone together. They walked through the same fairgrounds, ate the same candy apples, and ended the day at the same overlook. 5 years, Beatrice said, leaning against Nathan as they watched the sunset. "It seems both longer and shorter than that somehow. I'd live every day again exactly the same way, as long as they all ended with you," Nathan said. She turned to kiss him, and the passion that had ignited between them that first autumn had never diminished. "I love you, Nathan Ashford," "Thank you for saving my life." "Thank you for letting me," he replied, "and for saving mine in return." They stood together as the sun disappeared below the horizon, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of loss and the foundation of hope. By their 10th anniversary, the ranch had grown significantly. Nathan now ran one of the larger cattle operations in the area, respected by his neighbors and known for fair dealing and quality stock. Thomas was 9 years old, already showing signs of following in his father's footsteps with his love for the animals and the land. Rose was 7, a spirited girl who could ride as well as many grown men and had her mother's sharp mind for numbers and planning. And there was a new addition, 3-year-old Samuel, who had his father's quiet nature and his mother's smile. Beatrice had worried during her 3rd pregnancy, older now and remembering the difficulty of Thomas's birth. But Samuel had come into the world easily, as if he knew he was joining a family that was ready and waiting for him. The house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family. Where there had once been just 2 rooms, there were now 4 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and even a small parlor where Beatrice liked to sit, and so while the children did their lessons. Nathan had installed real glass windows, replacing the oiled paper he'd started with, and built a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the house. On warm evenings, the family would gather on that porch after supper. Nathan would sit in the rocking chair he'd built, one of the younger children usually in his lap, while Beatrice worked on her mending or knitting, and Thomas read aloud from whatever book they were currently sharing. The sound of their voices, the laughter when Thomas tried to do different voices for different characters, the peaceful quiet of their cattle lowing in the distance. This was everything Nathan had never known he wanted. Beatrice had become a pillar of the community in her own right. She organized a women's auxiliary at the church, started a small school in town for the children who lived too far from any existing school, and was known for her charitable work with families who fell on hard times. She never forgot what it was like to be desperate and alone, and she made sure no one in their community had to face such circumstances without help. One autumn evening, as they celebrated their 15th anniversary with a quiet dinner after the children had gone to bed, Nathan looked across the table at his wife and marveled at the way time had only made her more beautiful in his eyes. There were strands of silver in her dark hair now, and fine lines at the corners of her eyes from years of smiling, but to him she was as lovely as the day he'd first seen those blue-green eyes open and focus on him. "What are you thinking?" Beatrice asked, catching his gaze. "I'm thinking about that stagecoach," Nathan admitted. "About how I heard Jeremiah calling for help and didn't hesitate. What if I'd been delayed that day? What if I'd been out on the range instead of in town? You might have ended up somewhere else with someone else." "But I didn't," Beatrice said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I ended up exactly where I was meant to be. Sometimes I think I was supposed to get sick on that journey, supposed to arrive in Nevada barely conscious, so that you would be the one to find me. Every hard thing I went through before that moment, losing my parents, losing everything I thought was secure, it all led me here, to you." "I used to think I knew what I wanted from life," Nathan said. "A successful ranch, respect in the community, a comfortable existence. But I didn't know what any of it was worth until I had someone to share it with. You didn't just let me nurse you back to health, Beatrice. You brought my whole life back to health. You made it worth living." They sat together in the candlelight, hands joined across the table, two people who had started as strangers and become each other's everything. Outside, the wind whispered through the prairie grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon. Inside, their children slept safely in beds under a sturdy roof, the legacy of love and determination that their parents had built together. As the years continued to pass, Nathan and Beatrice settled into the comfortable rhythm of a long, happy marriage. They had their disagreements, of course. Beatrice thought Nathan took too many risks with the cattle prices, and Nathan thought Beatrice was too generous with people who took advantage of her kindness. But they'd learned early to talk through their differences, to listen and compromise and remember that they were on the same side. Thomas grew into a fine young man who did indeed take over more and more of the ranch responsibilities. At 18, he was as tall as his father and had developed his mother's gift for planning and organization. He had his eye on a girl in town, the daughter of the blacksmith, and Nathan and Beatrice both approved of the match. Rose had proven to be an excellent student, and when she turned 16, she expressed a desire to become a teacher. Nathan and Beatrice discussed it at length and decided to send her to the teaching college in Springfield. It was difficult to let their daughter go, but they understood the importance of education and supporting her dreams. Samuel, now 13, was the quiet one of the family, more interested in books and learning than in ranch work. Nathan worried at first that this meant his youngest son wouldn't fit into the life they'd built, but Beatrice reminded him that the world was changing and there was room for different kinds of success. Samuel had a talent for mathematics and might make a fine banker or accountant someday. On the evening of their 20th anniversary, Nathan and Beatrice stood on the porch of their home, looking out over the land they'd built together. The sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and red, painting the sky like fire. In the distance, they could see Thomas working with the horses, his movements confident and skilled. From the house behind them came the sound of Samuel practicing his arithmetic problems aloud, and somewhere in town, Rose was teaching children their letters. 20 years, Beatrice said softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stepped off that stagecoach, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Best 20 years of my life, Nathan said, pulling her close. You know, I was thinking the other day about what my life would have been like if you'd never arrived. I'd probably still be alone in a 2-room house, working myself to exhaustion with no one to share the victories or ease the burdens. And I'd probably be dead, Beatrice said matter-of-factly. If you hadn't been there that day, if you hadn't known how to care for someone with fever, I wouldn't have survived. You saved my life, Nathan. I never forget that. And you saved mine, he insisted. Maybe not in as dramatic a way, but you saved me all the same. You showed me what it meant to be part of something bigger than myself. You gave me a family, a purpose beyond just surviving and accumulating wealth. Beatrice turned in his arms to face him fully. We saved each other then, and we've built something beautiful together. 3 wonderful children, a successful ranch, a place in this community. I couldn't have imagined any of this when I was in Boston, scared and alone. But here we are. Here we are, Nathan agreed, and kissed her as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The next few years brought changes that were both exciting and bittersweet. Thomas married his blacksmith's daughter, Mary, in a joyful ceremony that brought the whole town together. They built a house on the ranch property, and within a year, Nathan and Beatrice became grandparents to a squalling baby girl named Catherine. Rose completed her teacher training and returned to Nevada to teach at the school her mother had helped establish. She was courted by several young men but remained independent, claiming she wanted to focus on her students. Beatrice secretly suspected her daughter was waiting for someone who truly understood her ambitions and supported them fully, and she approved of Rose's refusal to settle. Samuel did indeed pursue his interest in numbers and was apprenticed to the bank manager in town. showing such promise that there was already talk of him taking over the position when Mr. Henderson retired. Nathan found that he enjoyed being a grandfather immensely. He'd dandle little Catherine on his knee and tell her stories about the ranch, about her grandmother arriving sick and fevered so many years ago, and how love could bloom even in the most unlikely circumstances. The baby couldn't understand the words, but she seemed to enjoy the sound of his voice. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children were settled in their own homes and pursuits, Nathan and Beatrice would sit together just as they always had. Sometimes they talked about the day's events, sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, and sometimes they reminisced about the early days of their relationship. "You remember that first morning when I woke up properly and you tried to feed me broth?" Beatrice asked one evening. They were both in their mid-40s now, no longer young but not yet old, comfortable in their bodies and their life together. "I remember every moment of those first few days," Nathan said. "I was so worried you wouldn't make it. And then when you did, I was worried you'd leave as soon as you were well enough." "I couldn't have left even if I'd wanted to," Beatrice admitted. "My heart was already half yours by the time I was strong enough to walk around. The way you cared for me, so gentle and respectful even when I was at my most vulnerable. I'd never experienced that kind of pure, selfless kindness before." "It wasn't selfless," Nathan said. "I think I was already falling in love with you even then. When you were unconscious with fever, I kept thinking about how tragic it would be if you died before I got to know you. And then when you started to recover, when I began to learn who you were, I just fell harder." They'd had versions of this conversation before, but it never grew old. Their love story was the foundation of everything they'd built, and revisiting it felt like coming home to a warm fire after a long day in the cold. Rose eventually did find someone who matched her intellect and supported her ambitions. His name was James Cooper, a circuit judge who visited Nevada regularly and was immediately impressed by the intelligent, passionate teacher he met there. Their courtship was unconventional, conducted partially through letters during his travels, but it suited them both. They married when Rose was 22, and James made Nevada his permanent base so Rose could continue teaching. Samuel rose through the ranks at the bank, and eventually did take over as manager when he was just 25. He married a quiet, bookish woman named Elizabeth who worked at the general store, and they settled into a house in town where they seemed perfectly content with their peaceful life. Thomas and Mary had 3 more children, giving Nathan and Beatrice 4 grandchildren who visited the ranch regularly, keeping the house full of noise and laughter. Thomas had taken over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, with Nathan serving more as an advisor, and the younger man was doing an excellent job. The ranch continued to prosper, and Nathan felt proud knowing that the legacy he'd built would continue long after he was gone. On their 30th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were now 11 of them in total when you counted the grandchildren, and the house that had once been a simple 2-room structure now rang with voices and footsteps and life. After the meal, after the toasts and the cake and the presents, Nathan asked Beatrice to walk with him. They left the noise and celebration behind and walked out to the overlook at the edge of the property, where you could see for miles across the prairie. 30 years, Nathan said, his arm around Beatrice's waist. 3 decades since Jeremiah called for help and I opened that stagecoach door. Best decision you ever made? Beatrice asked, teasing. Only decision that ever really mattered, Nathan replied seriously. Everything good in my life came from that moment. You, our children, our grandchildren, the ranch that grew beyond anything I'd imagined. All of it started because you arrived sick and fevered from your journey, and I had the privilege of nursing you back to health. And falling in love with me, Beatrice added. That part was inevitable, Nathan said. How could I not love you? You're the strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. You took a hard journey that would have broken most people, and you turned it into a new beginning. You lost everything and rebuilt from nothing. You inspire me every single day. Beatrice leaned against him, comfortable after 3 decades of marriage. We rebuilt together. That's what matters. Neither of us could have done this alone. They stood in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the land they loved. Behind them, in the house, their family was laughing and talking, creating memories that would be passed down to future generations. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the familiar sense of earth and cattle and home. "No regrets?" Nathan asked softly. "Not a single one," Beatrice replied. "Just gratitude. For that stagecoach, for your kindness, for the fever that led me to you. I'd go through it all again in a heartbeat if I knew it would bring me here." As they walked back to the house hand in hand, the last light of day fading behind them, they could hear their grandchildren playing in the yard and their children's voices mingling in conversation. This was their legacy, Nathan thought. Not just the land or the cattle or the buildings, but the family they'd created and the love they'd shared. Everything else would fade with time, but this love, this connection, would echo through generations. The years continued their steady march. Nathan and Beatrice grew older together, their hair turning silver, their movements slower but no less purposeful. They celebrated 40 years of marriage surrounded by an even larger family as their grandchildren began to grow up and have children of their own. Nathan finally retired from active ranch work in his 60s, content to let Thomas run the operation while he enjoyed his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He took up woodworking as a hobby, creating toys and furniture for the expanding family. Beatrice continued her charitable work, but at a slower pace, spending more time with her daughters-in-law and granddaughters, passing down recipes and stories and wisdom accumulated over a lifetime. They celebrated their 50th anniversary in 1929, half a century after Nathan had proposed at the county fair. The celebration was enormous, with family traveling from across the state to honor them. The local newspaper ran a story about the couple, calling them pillars of the community and a testament to enduring love. During the party, their great-granddaughter asked Beatrice about how she and Nathan had met. Beatrice told the story once again, about the long journey from Boston, the fever that had nearly claimed her life, and the cowboy who had saved her with his gentle care and stubborn determination. "And then you fell in love?" the little girl asked, eyes wide with romantic notions. "And then we fell in love," Beatrice confirmed, smiling at Nathan across the crowded room. He smiled back, and even after 50 years, she could see the same warmth and devotion in his eyes that had been there from the beginning. That night, after all the guests had left and the house was quiet again, Nathan and Beatrice sat on their porch in the rocking chairs Nathan had made years ago. The night was warm, with fireflies dancing in the darkness and the sound of crickets creating a peaceful symphony. 50 years, Beatrice said wonderingly. "Half a century since you asked me to marry you." "Best question I ever asked," Nathan replied. "Best answer I ever received. You ever wonder what your life would have been like if you'd chosen differently? If you'd let someone else take me in, or if you'd encouraged me to leave once I recovered?" Nathan reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after decades of practice. "Not for a second. Every choice I made, every path I took, it all led me to the life I was meant to live. With you." They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Behind them, in the house, several of their grandchildren were staying overnight, their soft breathing audible through the open windows. Tomorrow, Nathan would take them out to see the cattle and teach them about ranch life, just as he'd done with his own children and countless grandchildren before. Beatrice would make her famous cinnamon rolls for breakfast and tell stories about the old days. But tonight, it was just the two of them, as it had always been at the core of everything. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and had built a life so full of love and meaning that it had rippled outward, touching countless others. "Thank you," Beatrice said softly. "For what?" "For being there that day. For opening that stagecoach door. For taking a chance on a sick stranger. For nursing me back to health and giving me a reason to live. For loving me through 50 years of ups and downs. For all of it." Nathan lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "The pleasure and the privilege have been entirely mine. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice Ashford, from that first moment to this one, and for all the moments still to come." They sat together as the night deepened around them, two souls who had become one through the years, through the challenges and triumphs, through the daily acts of love and devotion that make a marriage strong. The ranch that Nathan had built alone had become a family legacy. The fevered, desperate woman who had arrived on that stagecoach so long ago had become the beloved matriarch of a thriving family. As they finally rose to go inside, Nathan stopped and pulled Beatrice close one more time, kissing her with the same tenderness he'd shown on their wedding day. "I love you, Beatrice, always have, always will. And I love you, Nathan, my cowboy, my savior, my partner in everything, forever." They walked into the house together, ready for whatever the future might bring, secure in the knowledge that they would face it as they always had. Side by side, hand in hand, two hearts beating as one. The story that had begun with illness and uncertainty had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of love, and the extraordinary things that can happen when two souls find each other in the vast wilderness of life. The years rolled on with their quiet grace, bringing Nathan and Beatrice into their twilight years, surrounded by the overwhelming evidence of a life well lived. Their children were all successful and happy in their own ways. Their grandchildren were establishing themselves in the world, and their great-grandchildren were beginning to make their own marks on the family legacy. Nathan's health began to decline when he reached his early 70s, nothing dramatic but a gradual slowing, a weariness that no amount of rest seemed to cure. Beatrice noticed it before he did, the way he moved more carefully, how he tired more easily. She adjusted their life accordingly, making sure he didn't overexert himself, that he ate well and rested when needed. She nursed him through a bout of pneumonia one winter with the same fierce determination he'd shown nursing her through fever all those decades ago. "Fair is fair," she said when he protested her hovering. "You saved my life once. Let me return the favor." He recovered from the pneumonia, but both of them knew they were entering the final chapter of their story. They didn't speak of it directly, but there was a new tenderness between them, a cherishing of each moment they had together. On a warm spring evening in 1935, when Nathan was 73 and Beatrice was 71, they sat on their porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. The ranch was thriving under Thomas's capable management. Rose had retired from teaching but still tutored students in her home. Samuel had become a respected figure in the banking community and was training his eldest son to eventually take over his position. "No regrets," Nathan said suddenly, and Beatrice knew he wasn't asking a question. No regrets, she confirmed. Only gratitude for every single day. I used to be afraid of dying alone, Nathan admitted. Back before you came, it seemed like such a lonely end to a lonely life. But now I think about leaving you behind, and that's worse. Then don't think about it, Beatrice said firmly. We're here now together, that's what matters. Nathan turned to look at her, and even with the lines time had etched into both their faces, he still saw the beautiful, determined woman he'd fallen in love with. Promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone, don't give up. Keep living, keep being involved with the family, keep making a difference. You have so much to give, Beatrice. Don't let losing me stop you from giving it. I promise, she said, though the words hurt. But you have to promise me something too. What's that? That you'll fight to stay with me as long as you can. I'm not ready to let you go yet, Nathan Ashford. He smiled and took her hand. That's a promise I can keep. And he did keep it for several more years. They celebrated their 55th anniversary, their 56th, their 57th. Nathan grew frailer, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Beatrice never wavered. She was always there, his constant companion, making sure he was comfortable, reading to him when his eyes grew tired, holding his hand through the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. Thomas and his family moved into the main house to help care for Nathan, giving Beatrice support while allowing the couple to remain in the home they'd built together. It was a house full of love and laughter, even in those difficult days, with great-great-grandchildren running through the rooms and bringing joy to Nathan's days. One evening in late autumn of 1937, Nathan knew his time was coming to an end. He could feel it in his bones, a deep weariness that no amount of rest could touch. He asked Thomas to gather the family, wanting to see them all one more time. They came, all of them, filling the house to bursting. His children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren, the youngest of whom was just a few months old. Nathan looked at all of them from his bed, Beatrice sitting beside him holding his hand, and felt a profound sense of peace. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice weak but clear. "I wanted to see you all together one more time to tell you how proud I am of each and every one of you. This family, all of you, you're my greatest achievement. Not the ranch, not anything else I've done, but you. The love that fills this house, that's what matters." He turned to look at Beatrice, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And you, my love, you've been my partner, my best friend, my reason for everything for 58 years. You arrived sick and fevered from your journey all those years ago, and I had the privilege of nursing you back to health. But the truth is, you healed me too. You made my life complete. I love you, Beatrice. I always have, and I always will, even beyond this life." "I love you too," Beatrice whispered, bringing his hand to her cheek. "Thank you for every moment, every day, every year. Thank you for being my home." Nathan spent time with each of his children, grandchildren, and as many of the great-grandchildren as were old enough to understand. He shared memories, gave advice, and made sure each one knew they were loved. As the evening drew on, and the family gradually departed, leaving only his immediate children and Beatrice, Nathan felt the weight of his years settling over him like a warm blanket. That night, with Beatrice lying beside him in the bed they'd shared for nearly 6 decades, Nathan closed his eyes for the last time. He died peacefully in his sleep, his hand still holding Beatrice's, a small smile on his face as if he was dreaming of something beautiful. Beatrice woke to find him gone, and though she'd known it was coming, the grief hit her like a physical blow. She held him for a long time, tears streaming down her face, thanking him for everything he'd given her, promising to keep the promises she'd made. The funeral was the largest Nevada, Missouri had ever seen. People came from all over the state to pay their respects to Nathan Ashford, a man who'd been respected for his integrity, his hard work, and his devotion to his family. But as Beatrice stood beside his grave, surrounded by the enormous family they'd created together, she knew that his greatest legacy wasn't visible to most of these people. It was in the love that had sustained them through nearly 6 decades together, the partnership they'd forged, the life they'd built from the ashes of her desperate arrival in this town so long ago. True to her promise, Beatrice didn't give up after Nathan's death. She grieved, deeply and honestly, but she also kept living. She remained active in the church and the community, involved with her children and grandchildren. She told stories about Nathan to the younger generations, making sure they understood who he'd been and what he'd stood for. She lived for another 8 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1945 at the age of 81. In those years, she'd seen the ranch continue to prosper, watched her great-grandchildren grow up, and even met a few great-great-great-grandchildren. She'd kept the house much as it had been when Nathan was alive, finding comfort in the familiar surroundings and the memories that lived in every corner. On the night she died, she was found with a smile on her face, her hand resting on a photograph of Nathan taken on their 50th anniversary. It was as if she'd simply decided it was time to join him, ready to continue their journey together in whatever came next. They buried Beatrice beside Nathan under the spreading oak tree on the ranch property, where they could watch over the land and family they'd built together. The headstone was simple but eloquent. Nathan Ashford, 1852–1937, and Beatrice Zimmerman Ashford, 1854–1945. Two souls who found each other against all odds and built a legacy of love. In the years that followed, the ranch remained in the family, passed down through Thomas's line. The house was carefully maintained, becoming something of a family museum, a place where descendants could come and feel the presence of their ancestors. The story of how Nathan and Beatrice met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. Children grew up hearing about the young woman who arrived sick and fevered from her journey, desperately seeking an uncle who didn't exist, and the cowboy who took her in and nursed her back to health. They learned about how love could bloom even in the most difficult circumstances, how two people could build something lasting and beautiful together, how compassion and kindness could change the entire course of a life. The legacy of Nathan and Beatrice Ashford lived on not just in their descendants, but in the values they'd instilled and the example they'd set. Their love story, which began with illness and uncertainty on a dusty August afternoon in 1878, had rippled outward through time, touching hundreds of lives and creating a family tree that would continue to grow and flourish for generations to come. The ranch still stands today, a testament to what two people can build when they face life together with courage, love, and unwavering commitment. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispers through the prairie grass and the sun sets in brilliant colors over the Missouri landscape, it's easy to imagine two figures standing together on the porch, hand in hand, watching over the legacy they created from a chance encounter and a cowboy's compassionate heart. Their story at its heart was simple. She arrived sick and fevered from her journey, and he nursed her back to health. But from that simple beginning came something extraordinary, a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, a family that grew and prospered, and a legacy that would never be forgotten. It was a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin in the darkest moments, and that love, real and true and lasting, can heal far more than just physical illness. It can heal wounded hearts, broken spirits, and lonely souls, transforming everything it touches into something greater than what came before. And so their story ended not with sadness, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived and a love that conquered all obstacles. Nathan and Beatrice Ashford found each other in a small frontier town in 1878, and they created something that would last forever, a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West and perfected through decades of devotion, partnership, and unwavering commitment to each other and the family they built together.